We're going to talk about carbs. Yeah, carbohydrates. Should you love them? Should you hate them? And I'm going to be honest, like there was a time where I've never really hated carbohydrates. I mean, they always seemed like a natural part of the diet. I mean, I grew up in California where we had fresh fruit. I lived right next to acres and acres, hundreds and hundreds of acres of strawberry fields. We had strawberries all the time. We had blueberries. I mean, if you guys have ever been to the Salinas Valley, they have places like Watsonville that have tremendously amazing strawberries, like local grown strawberries there. I mean, they have a real smell that's just makes my mouth water. It's amazing, like those natural organic strawberries that they have there that literally were right outside my house for decades when I was growing up there in California. I ate tons of strawberries. I still do because I love them so much. And there was a time I'm a little bit sad where I didn't eat a lot of fruit because I kind of feared them. And part of it was due to this book that I read. And I even quoted it in my own book, this book by Dr. Joseph Mercola called Fat for Fuel. Now, that book has a lot of great information, but I really feel like it was lacking some of the newer data on carbs. And even he has recanted some of the things that he spoke of in that book. And he now eats quite a bit of carbs. He did like 4 decades of eating between 50 to 100 grams of carbs a day. And now in his latest material that he's releasing, he's eating like up to 400 grams of carbohydrates a day. And these are normal, natural, real, healthy sources. These are not processed foods. This is not the cereal, the Wheaties that I grew up with. He doesn't eat that. He's eating plenty of fresh fruit, lots. In fact, I think he starts his day with like, I don't know, a couple of pounds of watermelon or something like that. Because right now we're coming into the summer season where fruit is available, and he appreciates it. It's awesome. And so I'm going to share with you what I've learned about carbohydrates in the last several years because it's been all over the map. And I think that having a low carb diet is still beneficial in certain cases, but it's more helpful as a short term, goal-oriented, goal-directed focus where you are getting yourself metabolically flexible. This is one of the best things you can do to get metabolically flexible if you're eating a standard American diet, which all of us, including me, have eaten, which is basically the processed breads and grains and the freezer meals, right? Or pizza, or the chicken nuggets and stuff like that. Like that's the highly processed standard American diet, which I'm not really a fan of anymore because it's super highly, not just carbs, but it's highly processed carbohydrates, kind of like the fake foods, if you will, that aren't as nutritious as just the real, wholesome, natural carbohydrates, which can be found in fruit and in vegetables. And that's my go-to nowadays. But there was a time where I was eating super low carb, and I did it for about 2 years. And this was kind of at the beginning of my podcast, and I talked about this a lot. And I had Benjamin Bickman on the show, and he talked about how basically carbohydrates were not awesome, and he eats a very low carb diet. And he shared a lot of cool stuff. And he's still, I think, the guy, actually, interestingly, he's not a guy that studies carbs. He studies fat. Like he has his PhD in fat and studying the adipocyte and the things that fat can do, both good and bad. And it's super interesting. And what I've learned over the years is that, yes, a low carb diet is helpful to get yourself metabolically flexible and healthy, but it's not great for the long term. And I learned this myself firsthand because when I did, almost 2 years of probably 50 to 100 grams max carbs per day, I suffered a little bit. I actually lost muscle mass, which is not awesome because, as you know, I was then in my 5th decade of life. I'm in my 6th now. And losing muscle mass as an adult is not awesome. You want to be gaining muscle mass. Muscle is the secret. It is the key to longevity. If there's one thing I could tell you that will benefit you more than almost anything in the whole health realm, it's get more muscle, build more muscle, use your muscles, lift heavy weights, squats, lunges, the plank, which I love, go upstairs, like walk uphill, lift weights. It can be body weight, do a bunch of push-ups. I just did 100 push-ups last night because I had been traveling I've been traveling like crazy. I mean, I'm about to reach my 1 million mile mark on an airline that I've been flying for about the last 10, 15 years exclusively. And it's crazy. I've been flying a lot and I didn't have a gym to go to. I wasn't able to surf. I spent also a week back in Washington, D.C., as you guys know, no surfing happening there. Certainly no, no ocean, no waves, nothing like that. So I actually was doing push-ups for some exercise. Body weight is great, and we did tons and tons of walking, but muscle is key to longevity. And to get healthy muscle, you need carbs. And actually, what I was doing, which is this low carb program, which I started out benefiting from it because I was coming off of a more standard American sad diet, not awesome diet, where I was eating too much processed foods. I got myself metabolically healthy, but then I didn't add back in the healthy carbs as much as I should have. I started to eat berries and Greek yogurt, if you will, and some other things that had some carbs, but I just wasn't allowing myself to enjoy all of those natural, amazing, colorful carbs that are available that can be helpful with your metabolism. And so I just did it too long. I did the low carb thing too long, and I actually suffered from it. I actually lost weight, which I didn't need to lose. I wasn't overweight anyway. I lost muscle mass, which is the big bummer of it all. I never wanted to lose that, and I had to build it back. And I did so by adding back in carbs. So what's interesting is when you have a low carb diet, you initially can improve your metabolic health and get metabolically flexible, which is kind of the goal. And what that means is that your body can burn both fats and carbs equally well. And right now in the US, most of us, in fact, almost 95, I mean, it's crazy to even think about, 95% of us are not metabolically flexible. And that's because of the sad diet that most of us are exposed to, the standard American diet, and lots of processed foods, lots of fast foods, lots of quick foods. And as we get off of that and get metabolically healthy, then after maybe a couple of months of a low carb diet, we need to start incorporating carbs back, because what happens when you don't eat any carbs or very low carbs is that your body notices, right? Big surprise, your body's smart. And there's this hormone called, you've heard of it, cortisol, which is trying to protect you. It's trying to make sure you don't die from hypoglycemia or a low glucose state in the blood. Like, you can literally die from that. And this cortisol is there to protect you. Sadly, what it does when you're in this low carb state for too long is it gets elevated, and it gets elevated chronically. And you guys know that cortisol in elevation, in excess chronically, is not good. That's what chronic stress does. It elevates your cortisol. And that is inflammatory. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid, which is that I think at the heart and the root, literally, of all disease is inflammation. And Dr. Benjamin Bickman, who I alluded to earlier, a super bright guy, he would agree with that as well, that inflammation is at the root of all disease. But one of the things that can cause inflammation is elevated cortisol. And that can happen if you are chronically in ketosis, like for months and months and months, and you never cycle in and out of it. Like, ketosis is great, like I said, for the short term to get yourself metabolically healthy when you've been on for years and years the standard American diet, or like if you're trying to battle cancer, could also be helpful. If you're battling severe epilepsy, could also be helpful. There's a lot of situations where it could be helpful, but I just don't believe that it's all day, every day, 365 for the rest of your life. I just don't think that's the way it was meant. I mean, why would we have all these amazing, colorful, awesome foods out there if we couldn't partake of them, right? Like I mentioned, the strawberries that I love so much, but there's so many other amazing fruits and vegetables, which of course have carbohydrates that we would be missing out on if we always ate low carb, which I'm not a fan of for the long term. And that's because of this thing called cortisol, which gets elevated in a chronic low carb state, because it's there to try to protect you so you don't die from low blood sugar or hypoglycemia. But guess what it does? It tries to get your blood sugar up. And if you're not giving your body the resources or the raw material, the carbs, if you will, the sugar in its natural form, which is fructose, right? And fruit, if you're not giving it that raw material, it's got to make glucose somehow through this process of gluconeogenesis. But sacrificially, it takes your muscle mass and breaks that down to produce amino acids, which then can get shuttled into the process in the liver to make sugar, gluconeogenesis, at the expense of muscle, which is not awesome. That's what I personally experienced when I was losing muscle mass on my chronic low carb diet, which I have stopped, quit. I don't do a chronic low carb diet anymore. I don't do a hugely high crazy, but I do maybe a third fat, a third protein, a third carbs, roughly more or less. I probably do 40% carbs, maybe 30% protein, and maybe whatever's left, 25% of fat, if you will. But I think it's important to keep your fat percentage below about 30%. We'll get into why that is important. There's a whole thing called the Randall cycle, which you could get deep in the weeds here. I'm going to be honest. You could get super nerdy and geek out like I often do. I'm a geek, and I love the science, and I love the freaking Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain that happens in the mitochondria, which is where you make energy, right? The ATP, the 32 to 38, hopefully ATP that can be made when you have oxygen in your mitochondria, and you can do that even metabolizing. Yes, you can, Dr. Joseph Mercola, and I know he knows this now, metabolizing glucose, which comes from carbs. So healthy carbs are not the devil. They're not evil. They're not bad. They're good for you. You need them. And when you don't have them, guess what? Your body tries to make them anyway, but it does so by sacrificing your own muscle and bones even to make the needed glucose, which your body actually needs. You need glucose to live. Right? You need it to live. And that's why my daughter, who has type 1 diabetes, she was literally dying for a few months while we were diagnosing it because she could not utilize glucose. She could not. And she was wasting away. She lost, I don't know, like 20 pounds as a 7-year-old. Like, it was crazy. Like, how the heck do you lose that much weight? And yet she was eating voraciously, but her body could not uptake that glucose because she didn't have insulin. She has type 1 diabetes. And without insulin, she couldn't utilize the glucose that she was getting. And she was literally starving in a sea of plenty, if you will. She was dying. She was slowly withering away because she could not utilize the glucose that was around. She had plenty of ketones, and ketones can power the body for a short term, but not forever. You do need some glucose. And like I said, the body will sacrifice your own muscle mass, as it did with me when I was on this low carb diet for too long. And I lost muscle mass, which ain't good. It's not what you want, because not only will cortisol do that at the expense of the muscle, but it also will increase inflammation, as I talked about a little bit ago, and also impair your immune function. Having too much cortisol running around is not awesome. It's not awesome. You want to be able to utilize both glucose and fats, hopefully in the form of healthy fats, right? That we get from things like avocado, or maybe a little bit of fat on our meat or something like that. But we don't want to voraciously go crazy and just eat fat all day long like the keto community. Like, they can come after me, go for it. I got data to back this up. We are meant to be omnivores, to have it all, if you will, have it all coming from well-sourced, real food. We can have it all, and you can have your health. And I'm here to show it. I'm in my 50s now, and it is awesome. It is awesome to be healthy and strong, and to be able to keep up with my teenage boys, and to be able to do all this crazy stuff that I love to do and have the energy to do so. But it's because I've added back in the carbs to my diet, because I'm metabolically flexible. I can burn carbs or I can burn fat, either one, no problem for my mitochondria, no problem. And so that's the paradox here, that it's not mutually exclusive. It doesn't have to be. But if you do exclude the carbs for a long term, what happens is that you actually can become insulin resistant to a degree, because your body's not exposed to carbs. It's sort of, use it or lose it, is kind of the terminology that we're often familiar with. When you stop using a machinery in your body is not able to utilize the same machinery to break down the glucose if it's exposed to it. So if you eat basically no carbs for a long period of time, you actually become functionally insulin resistant, which is not good. It's not awesome. And so what you need to do is you need to slowly add back some carbs into your diet, healthy carbs, of course, from fruits primarily, maybe some sweetener like maple syrup, pure maple syrup, or honey, natural sweeteners like that, which I often use. Like I have some Greek yogurt, have a little dab of honey on it with some berries, yum yum, or pure maple syrup I use as well for my preferred sweeteners, to add back in some carbs into the program. But listen to your body as you do this. It's not like, one day to the next. If you've been keto for a long time, you want to slowly add the carbs back in, because if you do it too quickly, you're not going to feel awesome, right? You're going to be metabolically inflexible at first to those carbohydrates and be functionally insulin resistant because you haven't used that machinery to process the carbs for a while. Like I found myself when I was eating low carb for like about 2 years, I had to slowly add them back into my diet. So here's the thing. There's this thing called the Randall cycle. We're not going to get deep into the weeds about it, but it basically talks about in the powerhouse of your cells called the mitochondria, this organelle, which is amazing. It's what keeps us alive because it produces the energy, or ATP. Inside there, you can do either fats and metabolize them or glucose, but not at the same time. You have to flip back and forth. And if you're metabolically flexible, you can do that. And so what the keto community has gotten wrong is they think that once you utilize fat for fuel, if you will, then you can never utilize glucose again. And that's BS. That's wrong. In fact, it's not good if you exclude the glucose, because then, as I mentioned, you'll become functionally insulin resistant. And so you need to actually have less than about 30% fat in your diet so that you can be flexible enough to utilize the glucose when it comes around, because hopefully you will appreciate the healthful, beneficial fruits. In fact, coming into summer, we're going to be having watermelon at picnics, right? There's going to be more berries and bananas. In Hawaii, we're going to be heading back there. We have a banana tree there. We have a papaya tree. Mango is available. My neighbor has a giant mango tree. I can't wait. I love, love, love fruit in the summer. In fact, having these long, more than 12-hour days of daylight, I eat the whole 12 hours. I love it. I eat fruit. It's amazing. And that's when fruit was meant to be eaten, right? In the summer. It's a natural phenomenon, a natural practice, and it's good for you. But anyway, back to this Randall cycle. So what I was mentioning, that in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, the thing that makes you energy, keeps you alive, you can only either process fat or glucose, but one at a time. And so what you need is this little thing called metabolic flexibility, which I talked about, right? To be able to flip back and forth between fats and glucose. And most of us that have been eating a standard American diet for too long, including me, I was doing that for a time, we weren't able to flip back and forth between fat and glucose because we were processing mostly the highly processed foods, which are heavy on the carbs and heavy on these not good oils. That's one thing that I'm not going to really touch on much, but it's actually pretty important. The processed oils, which I'll just call the seed oils because most people have heard that name. They're basically the highly, highly processed oils that are in every type of processed food. Anything that comes in a bag or a box or with a barcode, any kind of label, is likely to have these not awesome oils. These are things like soybean oil. You've heard of it, right? Or just canola oil, corn oil. All of these things that are these processed oils that come from heavy, heavy machinery and processing, high heat, high pressure. They have to bleach it. They have to deodorize it because it's rancid. Like if you knew what it took to make oil out of a teeny tiny little seed called rapeseed, to make canola oil, what have you, it is a crazy process. You would never want to consume that because it's stinky, it's smelly, it's rancid, but then they bleach it and then they deodorize it and they pump it into your food because why? It's cheap. It makes sense from an economics perspective because it's dirt stinking cheap. It was, as an old friend of mine, an ER doctor by the name of Billy Mallon, he used to say, it was a dinosaur looking for a tar pit. It was available. It was a byproduct of, what they were doing. That you've heard of cottonseed oil, like the original, I think Wesson oil, whichever was the first one, literally made from the waste products of the cotton manufacturing. They took those tiny little seeds and they pressed them and they squeezed them. And they made this rancid oil. And then they decided, hey, let's make some Crisco. Let's make a cookbook. Let's sell this stuff. Let's have the ladies switch from using real natural fats like butter and lard, and let's have them make stuff with Crisco. And so guess what? They gave away a free cookbook. How genius, right? To get people hooked on Crisco, which is obviously horrible stuff for a lot of reasons. One, it's highly processed, of course, and it's also one of these bad hydrogenated oils, which wreaks havoc on our system. But sadly, most of us have no idea that our body incorporates these unhealthy fats into our tissues, and it's hard to get rid of it. It can take around 7 years to get rid of these fats that we've been exposed to through processed foods. The things that we talked about, the seed oils, like the cottonseed, the corn oil, the grapeseed, canola oil, soybean oil is super, super common. And sunflower oil, like these are in almost everything. There's 7 or 8 of them, and they are highly processed. If it doesn't say olive oil as the oil source, or avocado oil, or possibly coconut oil, those are kind of the 3 safe ones. Palm oil is okay as well, because those are made from just pressing the fruit. Avocado, you just squeeze it, boom, you have oil. Same thing. My favorite coconuts, they're fleshy, they're full of oil. Boom, squeeze them, you got oil. Olives, squeeze those things, you got oil. No high pressure, no high heat. Super duper simple stuff. They've been around for millennia. That's what I would only encourage us to eat as far as the oils go. You can use real butter, fine as well, but in moderation. Don't overdo it. Don't put butter on your steak. Like, why? You don't need to. I know the keto community does it, but don't overload your body with fat, because then your metabolic machinery, the mitochondria, is not going to be able to process glucose efficiently and well. And actually, the glucose will not be able to be processed in the mitochondria where you want it to be processed, because that's where you get the energy. It's going to be processed in the tissues through glycolysis, which gives you almost no ATP, like 2 ATP in comparison to 36 to 38 ATP. Like, why the heck would you want it processed out there in your tissues? And that's what's going to happen if you don't eat any carbs. Your glucose that you are exposed to will go through glycolysis, and it will also produce lactic acid, which is not awesome. This is another thing that I recognized and realized as I was trying to build muscle while I was doing keto. It just wasn't working. My muscles were more sore. They weren't growing appropriately. It's because of this lactic acid when you're not used to using the glucose on a regular basis through healthy consumption of real food carbohydrates like fruits and vegetables and honey and maple syrup and stuff like that. So anyway, sorry to belabor the point, but you want to have your metabolic machinery healthy and to be flexible, to switch back and forth between fats and healthy carbohydrates, because when the healthy carbohydrates go through there, you get lots of energy. I mean, you feel juiced. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's energizing to have some carbs. And I feel, and I have found in my own healthy journey that as I've lifted weights and gained muscle mass and done so through adding carbs back in, I just have more energy. I feel better. It's amazing. It's great. And that's because you can basically break down the glucose into carbon dioxide and water. And this is the good stuff. This is the carbon dioxide that your mitochondria release, and metabolic water, which is a healthy kind of water that you need in your body and your tissues. And this stuff is not inflammatory. This is awesome stuff. And it's a byproduct of carbohydrate metabolism, CO2 and water. Super simple. It's actually super clean when your mitochondria is healthy, when it is metabolically flexible. So you may need to go through a process, a couple of months maybe, of a low carb to fix your maybe broken temporarily metabolism from eating a SAD diet, the standard American diet, but then you want to incorporate the carbs again into your diet. You don't want to do keto forever. And the keto community can come after me, come after it. I actually did a couple of podcasts on keto a while back. I did one, I think, entitled The Dangers of Keto, and I got into this a little bit, and you can go back and re-listen to that. But what I wanted to just say today is a couple of really super duper healthy things that you can do right now are get your metabolism healthy through a short, brief, maybe a couple of month max time where you're doing low carb, and then you want to add the carbs back in and keep the carbs a part of your healthy diet. Like I mentioned last week in my podcast entitled "Don't Let Kids Listen to Health Podcasts" or something like that, where my own kid because I had listened to a health podcast by somebody who was like full on carnivore and not eating any carbs. And this person actually has repented, if you will. He has gone full circle and he now eats honey and maple syrup and fruit. And he was like the carnivore dude, like millions of followers because of his carnivore habits. And he added back in carbohydrates because he too found that from his personal experience and the data that carbs are not the devil. Carbs are not bad for you. And he's added a bunch of carbs into his diet. But my kid had listened to that podcast because I played it in the car and he went like full on keto and he was not thriving. And anyway, he's added the carbs back in, as have I, and we're both doing great. And so I'd encourage you also to be able to incorporate some healthy carbs. Also, make sure you have a great multivitamin. Vitamin E is actually super healthy to help your body be able to have a good metabolism. And it's you want to have the type that's alpha tocopherol. And it is not in all the vitamins. I was just reading my vitamin. It does have it, thankfully, the vitamin, the multivitamin that I use. It is in the form of alpha tocopherol, which is the one you want. Or you can buy niacinamide and take it 3 times a day in a small dose, 50 milligrams. That helps as well, in addition to vitamin E, to keep your metabolism healthy and to keep you able to produce this energy that you want. You want to be thriving and not just surviving your life. And the best way I know how to do this is to eat well and to make sure you are effectively supplementing with the things that you need. Like I just mentioned, niacinamide, which you need to make ATP. You need it to keep your mitochondria healthy. And so I add that in. I use a multivitamin as well. I do have a few supplements that I like to add because it's hard nowadays to get it all from diet. But just don't do what I did. I'm trying to use my experience so that you don't have to have that same. Don't do a low carb for years like I did. I was not thriving and I lost muscle mass. And now that I've added carbs back in, especially the healthy ones that I love so much, the fruits, the vegetables, a little bit of natural sweetener, the honey, maple syrup, I not only feel better, I can lift longer and better and harder. I'm regaining my muscle mass and I feel amazing. And carbs have been the game changer. So go back and re-listen to my podcast called The Dangers of Keto. Make sure that you don't let your kids listen to this health podcast because they just can't put all this in perspective. Now that we've gleaned several decades of experience, I think we can place it better. We've had some more personal experience. And so don't let kids listen to health podcasts. Make sure they just learn healthy behaviors from watching you. You are the best way to teach them through your example. You've got this. It doesn't have to be hard. It actually is pretty simple. Eat real whole foods. The single ingredient stuff, the stuff that you recognize, bananas, berries like I love so much, meat, all the stuff, veggies. Oh, I love veggies. I'm going to have Brussels sprouts tonight. I mean, it's just awesome, simple stuff. Not rocket science. Get out there, move your body every day, breathe, get out in nature, connect with your family and friends. It's simple principles. I teach them all in my book, Preventable, 5 Powerful Practices to Avoid Disease and Build Unshakable Health. Follow me on Insta, Facebook, wherever. Got some amazing programs coming up. Make sure you share this episode, share it out, especially if you have somebody who's been confused about carbs and keto and like, what the heck should I eat? Grab my book, listen to the podcast, and message me. If you have questions, I'm available. I actually answer my own messages. Dr. Thomas Hemingway, Dr. Thomas Hemingway, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you find me, thomashemingway.com. Happy to answer your questions. You're the reason I'm doing this each and every week. I love to share what I'm learning, what I'm loving, what has helped me, my family, and many others. So until next time, a big aloha. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. These podcasts take hours of research, and taking just 2 seconds of your life to hit the like, subscribe, and share button will help a ton and get this word out to help more and more people. Thanks in advance. Mahalo and aloha.